One of the modern day guitar heroes, an all-time great, I of course am referring to the sensational John 5. From small town roots in Michigan to Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie, and now selling out stadiums with Motley Crue and everything in between, he really does have quite the story to tell. So today we're going to take a look at who John Lowery was before he became John 5. John William Lowery was born on July 31st, 1970 in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And famously, of course, he's a massive fan of both the Monkees and Hee Haw and was inspired to pick up the guitar at 7 years old after he got one for Christmas after religiously watching Buck Owens and Roy Clark. Unlike a lot of the stories you hear about various musicians, though, and their childhood's normally not so good, John actually had a pretty normal one with super supportive parents, even allowing him to perform live in bars, the ones that would allow him to perform underage, so long as it didn't interfere with his education. By his very early teenage years, he formed his first ever band called Dirty Tricks, Tricks with two X's because that's what edgy teenagers do. And they actually ended up winning a Battle of the Bands, which then led to the formation of John's high school band, Vampirella. According to John, that was when he began to experiment with his now signature makeup, saying, quote, "We looked crazy on stage. I had already started wearing eyeliner anyway, but the stuff we wore on stage was crazy." Upon turning 18, John decided to make the trek out of Michigan and move to LA to pursue becoming a session guitarist, as he felt that might be a little bit more obtainable for him. Unfortunately for him, though, he was robbed on his very first night in LA. And, you know, most people that move out there to chase their dreams end up coming back home in a relatively short period when things inevitably don't work out for them. Imagine getting robbed on your very first night. That would be enough to send me home next day. Eventually, though, John ended up working with the band Alligator Soup, which in turn led to him meeting the legendary bass player Rudy Sarzo, of course from Quiet Riot, Ozzy, Whitesnake, so many others, and the two began working on Rudy's new band at the time, Sun King. Upon joining forces, Rudy introduced John to now legendary producer Bob Marlette, and honestly, you should take a shot every time you hear Bob Marlette's name mentioned in this video. It's quite a bunch. Anyways, he's produced records for Alice Cooper, Airborne, Rob Zombie, David Lee Roth, Black Sabbath, Sebastian Bach, Tracy Chapman. List goes on and on and on. He even wrote the Song That Saves the Universe in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is just amazing. I'm a huge Bill and Ted fan, so that's just the coolest thing ever. John and Bob collaborated on a number of projects back in the day, including soundtracks for movies and TVs, commercials, stuff like that. And John's work with Bob also led to him getting a gig playing for Lita Ford in support of one of John's favorite bands, Kiss. Anyways, Bob Marlette was actually on this show back early in the year, and we discussed him meeting John 5, as the two are still very, very close to this day, and how he actually stole John from the band Sun King for another project. I'll play that clip now, and I'll put a link in the description if you want to check out the entire interview.
So here's how John and I first got together. Was John was actually in a band called Sun Kings with Rudy Sarzo. And Rudy Sarzo invited me down. It's like, dude, will you come and help us and, get us going? Because they had got a record deal, but they were sort of spinning because they didn't have the songs and they didn't have, the whole thing. So I went down and started working with them, right? And, after 5 minutes, I was like, okay, the guitar player there, that guy with all the tattoos and the pink Jackson guitar and no shirt, it's like, hey, you come with me. It's like I ended up kind of stealing him out of the band. And then that's where there's a band called Red Square Black that I did in the early 90s, right? And I stole John out of that. And then we put that band together, Red Square Black. So that sort of was the beginning of my relationship with John way back in the day.
Also in Red Square Black was legendary drummer Randy Castillo, rest in peace. Best known, of course, for his time playing with Ozzy during the mid-'80s to early '90s, from The Ultimate Sin to No More Tears, and then replacing Tommy Lee in Motley Crue for the New Tattoo record. Red Square Black released one EP in 1994 titled Square, and featured, of course, John Five, then still known as John Lowery, on guitar, Randy Castillo on drums, as well as vocalist Mark Binder and bassist Angelo Barbera, which I think is how you say his last name. Now, there's some live footage of RSB up on the screen right now, but aside from John Five and Mark Binder, I'm not quite sure that it's the same lineup from the EP, as the description of the original video where I found this says otherwise, and the quality is obviously far too poor to tell. You can't hardly make anyone out. Following just one tour after John joined Red Square Black, they would end up disbanding a short time later, and John would wind up being chosen over 2,000 plus other guitar players to join Katie Lang on her tour throughout 1996 and 1997, even appearing on her 97 home video release, Live in Sydney. Around the same time as the Katie Lang thing, John had heard that Marilyn Manson was looking for a replacement for guitarist Daisy Berkowitz, so he reached out, but by that point the role had already been filled by Zim Zim. Upon learning that, he ended up working with the metal god himself, Rob Halford, to form the band Gimp, but the name was quickly changed to Two, spelled with the number 2, W-O. Two released one album, Voyeurs, under Nine Inch Nails mastermind Trent Reznor's label Nothing Records, which was an imprint of Interscope and also featured other such acts as Nine Inch Nails, obviously, Manson, and Pig, among others. Trent Reznor also produced the record as well. Bob Marlette was, of course, also involved in the record. While some of the stuff on the album is actually pretty decent, not a bad album at all, it failed to really move the needle at all, though, with the opening track, I Am a Pig, really being the only song on the whole album that did anything, peaking at number 22 on the U.S. rock chart, with the album as a whole hitting an unimpressive position of 176. While Halford had some demos prepared for a second album, the band was scrapped and the material ended up on his solo Halford album. Imagine, though, if John would have done something with Rob like Fight, something a little bit more straightforward metal. That would have been really, really cool. That first Fight record, War of Words, featuring Russ Parrish, a.k.a. Satchel from Steel Panther, is just phenomenal. Killer album. Voyeurs from Two is great as well, but to hear John do something like Fight would have been fucking sweet. Anyways, following the disbanding of Two, John landed what was really his first true break as a musician, playing guitar for one of his idols, David Lee Roth, on 1998's DLR Band. Recalling how he got the gig with Diamond Dave in an interview with The Sessions, John said, quote, "I was reading Crazy from the Heat. I was at my friend's house, and there was a number in the back of the book where you could get a hold of the management company. And I thought to myself, I think I'm going to reach out and call this number and see what's going on. Because I knew Dave wasn't doing much at the time, and I loved Van Halen, and I loved Dave Lee Roth. And I said, are you guys accepting any music right now or anything like that? And they said, well, not really, but you can send a CD and we'll see what we've got. And I was like, oh my God, just that little bit. I was shocked. I was like, this is insane. So I go there, I record with Bob Marlette, and I do my best Van Halen. I do Slam Dunk, and I do all these songs. Of course, no vocals, just my best Van Halen impersonation. And I sent it to them, and they said, we like it. Can you send 3 more? I was like, God, this is the most crazy thing ever. So I did 3 more, and they said, we like these too. Can you do 3 more? And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't have any more money. Back then, studios costed a lot of money. Now we can just be in our house and do it. And they said, okay, well, Dave wants to meet you. Go to his house. Listen, David Lee Roth is not around. He's not hanging out. It's very hard to meet David Lee Roth. And I go to his house, and this is the house where they filmed Pretty Woman. They did all the photo shoots for the early Van Halen. They rehearsed in this basement, and this is the house. And there's Dave in his overalls, and he's like, John, great to see you. We're going to make a record. I really like what you're doing. And I was like, oh my God. I couldn't believe it. And then later on, I had him sign a copy of Crazy from the Heat, the book that made it all happen. And it says, David Lee Roth, 1998. This was after I'm a little more comfortable with him, and I said, hey, Dave, sign this. So you just have to go after things and do things and make it work. The record was recorded and mixed within just 10 days, a technique that Dave had previously used back in 1979 for the classic Van Halen 2 record. As John has noted, while working with Dave in that time frame, Dave said, quote, if you can't do it in 2 takes, then you can't do it. While the album is truly excellent, very, very old school Van Halen inspired, of course, and it reviewed very well, it did not sell so hot as it was released independently via Dave's now defunct What Was That label, and there was no sense of urgency from Dave to hit the road to support the record. A couple of interesting things about the DLR Band album, though. John also plays bass on the album under the pseudonym Bourbon Bob, and longtime collaborator Bob Marlette had a hand in writing a bunch of the tracks on the album. And I believe he produced it as well. I'm not 100% on that, but I think so. And John was not the only guitarist on the album, though, as Terry Kilgore and Mike Hartman also wrote and played on a number of tracks on the record. Perhaps most notably, though, the drummer on that record is Ray Luzier, who at that time was pretty much an unknown, but now, of course, is best known for being Korn's drummer for about the last 15 years or so, joining the band in 2009, I believe. Ray would also play on DLR Band's follow-up, Diamond Dave, in 2003. John also appeared on Diamond Dave, performing on the track Thug Pop. The same year as DLR Band released, 1998, Marilyn Manson had finished recording the Mechanical Animals album and needed a new live guitarist as Zim Zum had left the band. Manson's management reached out to John to set up a lunch meeting, with John recalling, quote, I get there and it's Manson himself sitting at the table. As a result of that first meeting, I had a new name and I was in the band. Now known as John 5, he was originally brought on to play live on the Rock is Dead tour, but he also contributed to the Grammy-nominated single, Astonishing Panorama of the End Times, which appeared as a studio recording on both Manson's The Last Tour on Earth live album, as well as the MTV Celebrity Deathmatch soundtrack. And by the way, the song lost the Grammy nomination to Deftones' Elite from the amazing White Pony album. Upon the backlash and death threats that Manson and the band received due to the Columbine shooting in April of 1999, the band began working on the Hollywood in the Shadow of the Valley of Death album, which was John's first full-length album with Manson. During this time, John also continued to do some session work, including with David Lee Roth, like I mentioned earlier, as well as recording a Jimi Hendrix cover for a Hendrix tribute album. Hollywood would eventually release in November of 2000 to rave reviews, with some calling it one of the best albums of 2000, and Kerrang! Magazine naming it one of the best albums of the decade. Following that success, the band would go on to record what would be John's final hurrah with Marilyn Manson, 2003's The Golden Age of Grotesque. It was also during this time that arguably the most famous Manson-John 5 era thing happened. I, of course, am referring to the onstage fight between the two at the 2003 Rock and Park. Recalling the incident in an interview with Eddie Trunk, John had this to say. What happened was my sister passed away. My sister died unexpectedly, and I was shocked. I was in Europe and I was coming down the stairs off a stage after a concert, and they told me my sister died, and I was in a state of shock. You just go into a state of shock. And here's the strange thing that happened to me. I didn't sleep for days and days and days. It was the strangest thing. I just wasn't tired. And I remember going to the band members' rooms going, I can't sleep. I just can't sleep. I haven't slept in now 2 days, or blah, blah, blah. So anyways, fast forward to the Rock and Ring show. Now, what Manson did, that happened all the time. He didn't do anything wrong. I just snapped. It was weird. I went nuts. I didn't even remember. I just snapped. And I feel terrible watching it now because it really was my fault. You can't really hear what he's saying, obviously, but he's saying, pick up your guitar. Because it looks like he's going, come on, come on. But he's saying, pick up your guitar, because he knew what was going on. And I feel horrible about it, but it was just a bad situation at that time. It was terrible because he was so nice during that time and all that stuff. I was in such a weird place and it was just a bad time. I don't even remember it happening. It was just terrible. Shortly thereafter, in 2004, John and Manson parted ways, with John recalling in a 2009 interview. What actually happened was, at the end of the tour, we were just on different roads. It was completely amicable. He just wanted to write with other members of the band, and I wanted to do other things. Following his departure from Manson, John, who obviously kept the Five moniker at that point, had a chance encounter with the legendary Les Paul and subsequently began working on his first solo album, 2004's Vertigo. The next year, 2005, John formed the band Loser alongside vocalist Joe Graff from the band Jibe, bassist Charles Lee, and drummer Glendon Crane. The band was co-founded by, you guessed it, Bob Marlette. The band was signed to Island Records and appeared on the 2005 Fantastic Four soundtrack with the track Disposable Sunshine, co-wrote by Bob Marlette. And they were actually gaining some traction, but everything regarding the band Loser would be halted upon John meeting Rob Zombie at a Camp Freddy benefit in 2005 for the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. Recalling in a 2005 interview, Rob Zombie had this to say about meeting John. Camp Freddy asked me to do this benefit just to play one song at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim for this tsunami relief thing. And John was there and we played one song, Thunder Kiss, and it kicked ass and he's a super cool guy and I was like, this is perfect. John said, do you need a guitar player for Ozfest? I said, yes. He said, I want to do it. I said, perfect. Done. The gig with Zombie would, of course, go on to become a full-time thing for John, eventually forcing him to leave his band Loser. As John said in a press release at that time, being the founding member of Loser, my decision to leave was not an easy one. I've been juggling two careers, both with Loser and Rob Zombie, for over 1 year now. I found it impossible to be in two places at once. John 5 would go on to appear on a number of Rob Zombie albums, including his first with Rob, Educated Horses, in 2006, 2013's Venomous Rat Regeneration Vendor, which of course featured numerous contributions from Bob Marlette, and his final album with Rob, 2021's The Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy, among others. John's final collaboration with Rob, though, at least up to this point, is the short-lived supergroup LA Rats that also features Nikki Sixx and Tommy Clufetos, who only released one single in May of 2021, a cover of I've Been Everywhere for the Liam Neeson movie, The Ice Road. Speaking of Nikki Sixx, John is very, very close with both Sixx and Tommy Lee, which of course played a huge role in him getting the gig to replace Mick Mars in Mötley Crüe late last year after Mick, quote-unquote, retired, or at least that's what Motley wants you to think, following last summer's wildly successful The Stadium Tour with Def Leppard. Throughout all these years and various different projects, John has also carved out a very nice solo career for himself, as he truly is one of the greatest guitar players on the face of the earth, having released a total of 10 studio albums up to this point, most recently in 2021 with Sinner. I've seen John live a number of times now, once with Crüe. I actually went to their very first show with him in Atlantic City. I did a video on that. I'll link it down in the description. Once with Rob Zombie and 2 or 3 times at his solo shows, and he really is just fucking incredible. The guy can play literally anything, and when he busts out that bluegrass shit, god damn. Not to mention, I don't think anyone can truly replace the highly underrated Mick Mars, but fuck, if ever there was someone to do it, it is most certainly John 5, hands down. The guy is a perfect fit. All right, though, I gotta run. My fiance is waiting to crank it for me because even though we live with ghosts and they might see, God told her to. So I gotta run. But thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you next time.